Before Christianity swept across Europe, Ireland had gods. Not the distant, detached gods of Olympus, but warrior poets, master craftsmen, and magicians who walked the earth with power that defied comprehension. They arrived in a supernatural fog so thick it blotted out the sun for 3 days. They carried 4 legendary treasures: a stone that screams for true kings, a sword of unstoppable light, a spear that never misses, and a cauldron that brings the dead back to life. And then, they vanished. Today, we're uncovering the epic, tragic, and ultimately transcendent story of the Tuatha De Danann, Ireland's forgotten gods. Our story doesn't begin in Ireland. It begins in 4 mystical, isolated cities hidden from the mortal world: Phalias, Gorias, Finias, and Murias. These weren't simple towns. They were centers of magical education, technological mastery, and artistic brilliance. The Tuatha De Danann, descendants of earlier settlers called the Nemedians, dedicated themselves to these cities to master everything: science, military strategy, high art, sophisticated poetry, and most crucially, druidry and magic. They were preparing for their fated return to Ireland, which they believed was their ancestral birthright. In each city, a master sage taught them their deepest secrets. Phalias, the sage Morfessa, taught them the esoteric sciences and the laws of kingship. Here they learned how to rule justly. Gorias, under Esras, they mastered poetry as a magical, binding force. They became warrior poets capable of composing satires that could physically afflict victims. Finias, the sage Ussias, perfected their martial skills in smithcraft, transforming warfare into a refined art. Murias, Semias trained them in druidry, healing, and nature magic, the summoning of weather and manipulation of life itself. When their education was complete, they gathered their 4 legendary treasures, one from each city: the Leofail, stone of destiny, from Phalias; the Cleamsale, sword of light, from Gorias; the Slaabua, spear of victory, from Finias; the Quar Ansect, cauldron of the Dagda, from Murias. Armed with knowledge, skill, and these magical talismans, the Tuatha De Danann turned their eyes south toward Ireland. It was time for conquest. Their arrival was the most dramatic event in Irish mythology. According to the ancient texts, they came in dark clouds and descended upon the mountains of Connaught in a supernatural darkness that lasted 3 days and 3 nights. The entire island was plunged into shadow. Different versions of the story exist. Some say they arrived in ships and burned them to show they'd never retreat, their smoke creating the darkness. Either way, the message was unmistakable: they were here to stay. At this time, Ireland was inhabited by the Fir Bolg, the men of bags, a hardy, agricultural people who had built their own civilization generations before. They were stunned by these newcomers: tall, fair-haired, dazzling, speaking a beautiful, complex language, wielding weapons that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. Led by King Nuada, the Tuatha De Danann tried diplomacy first. They offered to split Ireland in half, hoping to avoid bloodshed. But the Fir Bolg, led by King Eachade Mac Airc, refused. They had worked too hard to build their kingdom. These were uninvited invaders, and if they wanted to stay, they'd have to fight. The 2 armies met on the plains of Mag Tuired, the Plain of the Pillars, in what is now County Mayo. For 4 brutal days the battle raged. The Fir Bolg fought fiercely, driven by their love for the land. But the Tuatha De Danann had superior weapons, coordinated strategy, and overwhelming magical ability. In the chaos, a pivotal moment changed everything. Esreng, the greatest Fir Bolg champion, faced King Nuada in single combat. In a fierce exchange, Esreng's sword came down and lopped off Nuada's right arm at the shoulder. The Tuatha De Danann won the battle, crushing their enemies and securing control over Ireland. But victory came at a catastrophic political cost. According to sacred law, their king had to be physically perfect, whole and unblemished, symbolizing the wholeness and fertility of the land itself. With his arm gone, Nuada was no longer eligible to rule. In their greatest moment of triumph, the Danann found themselves without a legitimate king. This single act of violence set off a chain reaction that would nearly destroy their civilization. Desperate for leadership, the Tuatha De Danann made a catastrophic choice. They elected Brez, a handsome, charismatic young warrior whose mother was Danann but whose father was Elatha, a Fomorian king. The Fomorians were their dark opposite, monstrous, chaotic beings representing the destructive forces of nature. The hope was that making Brez king would build a political bridge between the two peoples. That hope was tragically misplaced. Brez became an unprecedented tyrant. He imposed heavy taxes on his own people, forcing them into servitude. The great champions and druids were reduced to menial labor. The legendary Dagda, the good god, was forced to build forts and earthworks. The royal hearth was kept cold, the cooking spits idle, and even bards and poets received meager fare while Brez hoarded the kingdom's treasures. The breaking point came when a revered poet named Kerper visited the court. Instead of lavish hospitality, he was placed in a tiny, dark room with no fire and given only 3 small, dry cakes. It was an unforgivable insult. Outraged, Kerper composed the first recorded satire in Irish history, a potent magical curse. Without food quickly on a dish, without cow's milk on a cauldron, without a man's abode after the setting of the sun, let the prosperity of Brez not be visible. The power of the satire was absolute. It crystallized public discontent and brought physical blemishes to Brez's body, symbolizing the rot of his rule. Humiliated and deposed, Brez ran to his father and the monstrous Fomorian overlord Balor of the Evil Eye, begging for an army to retake his throne. But the Tuatha De Danann had an answer. Their physician, Diane's sect, had fashioned a miraculous new arm for Nuada, made entirely of shining silver. With this metallic marvel, Nuada Ergit Lam, Nuada of the Silver Hand, was restored to the kingship, representing the return to righteous rule. But it was too late. Brez was returning with the full, monstrous army of the Fomorians, giants, sea demons, and chaos incarnate, ready to enslave Ireland forever. The stage was set for an even more cataclysmic conflict. As the Danann prepared for war, a radiant young man appeared at the gates of Tara, Ireland's sacred heart and spiritual center. He announced himself as Lug. The gatekeeper adhered strictly to Tara's ancient law. No one without a specialized skill was allowed entry. He asked what Lug could do. Lug's response was astonishing. He claimed to be a wright, a smith, a champion, a harper, a poet, a historian, a sorcerer, a physician, a cupbearer, and a skilled craftsman. The gatekeeper was unimpressed. Tara already had experts in all those fields, but Lug issued a challenge. Ask your king if he has any one man who possesses all these skills combined. Intrigued, King Nuada agreed to test him. His best chess players challenged Lug. He won every game. His strongest man hurled a massive flagstone. Lug flicked it back with contemptuous ease, farther than anyone had before. His chief harper played. Lug's music was so magical the entire court wept, laughed, and fell into enchanted sleep. Lug was confirmed, a master of everything. Recognizing this multifaceted power, Nuada willingly gave command of the army to Lug. He was titled Samuldanak, master of all arts. But here's the crucial twist. Lug's arrival was no accident. His father was scion of the Danann. His mother was Ethniu, daughter of Balor of the Evil Eye himself. A prophecy had foretold that Balor would be killed by his own grandson. Terrified, Balor locked Ethniu in an impossible tower to prevent conception. But fate found a way. Lug was born, spirited away, and raised in secret by the sea god Manannán mac Lir, who gave him magical weapons. Now the prophesied grandson, the only one who could face Balor, had returned. The plains of Moitura, relocated to County Sligo, became the final, cataclysmic battlefield. Order and civilization faced raw chaos and destruction. On one side, the Danann led by brilliant, charismatic Lug. On the other, the Fomorians led by vengeful Brez and their ultimate champion, the monstrous Balor of the Evil Eye. The Fomorian army was a force of nature, huge, ugly, terrifyingly numerous. Lug initiated the battle by riding around the entire army on Manannan's magical horse, singing a potent battle incantation that boosted Danann morale while mystically weakening the Fomorian resolve. The conflict was biblical in scale. The Dagda swung his massive, wheeled club that could kill 9 men with one end, while the other could resurrect the recently dead as ghostly warriors. Tuatha of the Silver Hand fought with his glorious Clayam Sale, the Sword of Light, until he met Indech, the Fomorian king, in single combat and fell. The Morrigan, the Phantom Queen and Goddess of War, soared over the battlefield, shifting between woman, raven, and wolf, shrieking battle cries that terrified Fomorians while bolstering Danann courage. She was everywhere, influencing every fight. Dian's sect and his children worked tirelessly at the rear, keeping warriors alive through healing magic and spells. Some Tailies claim they could throw fallen Danann warriors into a magical well, and they'd emerge whole and ready to fight again. But even with all their heroism and magic, the Danann began to fall before the devastating power of Balor. His greatest weapon was a single, monstrous eye kept perpetually shut by a heavy, complex eyelid. When attendants pried it open using mechanical winches and ropes, his gaze emitted fatal venom that instantly killed anyone it fell upon and poisoned the earth itself. As the eyelid began to open and whole sections of the Danann army melted away, all seemed utterly lost. At that exact, decisive moment, Lug Lamfada, Lug of the Long Arm, fulfilled prophecy. He took up his sling and just as Balor's deadly gaze was about to be unleashed, hurled a smooth, massive stone with incredible, focused power. The stone struck Balor directly in the evil eye, driving the grotesque orb completely out through the back of his head. Its fatal power was instantly turned back upon the waiting Fomorian army, decimating and slaughtering their own ranks. With their champion slain, the Fomorians broke, their line shattered, they fled in chaos. The victory was absolute. Brez was captured, and his life was spared only on the humiliating condition that he teach the Danann the secrets of agriculture, when to plow, sow, and reap, tying him forever to the cycle of the land he had once abused. With the Fomorians utterly defeated and chaos expelled, the Tuatha De Danann ruled a long and prosperous golden age centered around the hill of Tara. Art, high culture, magic, and stability flourished. This era saw their greatest figures come into their own. The Dagda, the good god, the great earthy father figure embodying abundance, fertility, and strength. His bottomless cauldron ensured endless sustenance. His magical harp could control emotions. His club could kill or resurrect. Lug, eternally youthful, brilliant, master of all arts, associated with the sun and light. The harvest festival Lugnasad is named in his honor and still celebrated today. The Morrigan, the complex, terrifying phantom queen representing the brutal reality of war, fate, and sovereignty. She presided over battlefields and the right to rule. Brigid, daughter of the Dagda, a triple goddess of poetry, healing, and smithcraft. So beloved her worship was later syncretized into Christianity as Saint Brigid. Ogma, the eloquent warrior who invented the Ogham alphabet, proving that champions could be as eloquent as they were powerful. The 4 treasures weren't merely weapons. They were symbols of the 4 qualities necessary for perfect rule. The Lia Fail, stone of destiny, legitimacy, and sovereignty. Placed on Tara, it would roar when the true High King stood upon it. Its power was divine affirmation of a ruler's right to the land. The Clayam Sale, sword of light, justice, and truth. Once drawn, it flashed with blinding sunlight, and no enemy could escape it. It represents the king's power to enforce laws and cut through deception. the Slea Bua spear of victory, skill and unstoppable victory. This was Lug's weapon, known for unerring accuracy. Legend says it had to be kept submerged in water to prevent it from attacking enemies on its own. The Quar Ansact cauldron, abundance and generosity. It provided endless food for any company, ensuring no one left unsatisfied. Crucially, some versions claim it could resurrect dead warriors, maintaining the tribe's fighting force. Even a golden age must end. After generations of peace, prosperity, and cultural flourishing, a new group of invaders appeared. The Milesians, the sons of Mil Espain, sailing from what is now Spain. They represented the mortals, the Gaelic-speaking Celts who were ancestors of historical Irish people. Their arrival was met not with immediate violence, but with ritualized poetry, diplomacy, and magical conflict. The Milesian fleet was led by their preeminent poet and druid, Amergin Gluingel. Amergin was the first to step ashore. In an act of profound magical sovereignty, he chanted the famous incantation of Amergin, a poetic declaration claiming the land by identifying himself with Ireland's very spirit. I am the wind which blows out upon the sea. I am the wave of the ocean. I am the bull of 7 battles. He was met honorably by 3 goddesses of the Danann, Iriu, Banba, and Fodla, who together represented Ireland's sovereignty. Each asked that the island be named for her. Amergin promised Iriu that her name would be primary, giving us Eir, the modern Irish name for the island. But diplomacy soon gave way to conflict. The Danann proposed a magical test. The Milesians had to sail back 9 waves distance. If they could return and land again, overcoming Danann magic, the island was theirs. As the Milesian fleet sailed out, the Danann druids conjured a catastrophic magical storm and blinding fog to drive them away forever, scattering ships and sinking vessels. But the Milesians were masters of druidry too. Amergin stood on his ship amidst the raging tempest and chanted a counterspell, appealing to the spirit of Ireland itself. I appeal to the land of Ireland. I appeal to the fertile, visible sea, the high-tiding wave, the beautiful land. I appeal to the goddess Iriu, that the waves may be silent and the high tides subside. With the Danann storm broken, the Milesians landed successfully. In a final, climactic battle, they defeated the Tuatha De Danann in open field. The great, visible reign of Ireland's gods was finally and permanently over. Defeated but crucially not destroyed, a profound pact was made between the races. The Milesians had won the surface of Ireland, the world of sun, wood, iron, and mortality, so the island was magically divided. The mortals took the world above, the physical reality they could see, until the immortal Tuatha De Danann would receive the world below, the other world existing just beneath reality's veil. These godlike beings didn't leave Ireland. They simply passed into another dimension. They took up residence beneath their former palaces, the great ancient burial mounds and cairns still dotting the landscape, Newgrange, the Hill of Tara, and countless others. These mounds, called Shia, pronounced She, the root of Banshee, became permanent, hidden gateways to their magical, eternal kingdoms. The Dagda, as supreme druid, was tasked with dividing the Shia among the remaining kings and queens, ensuring each received their own eternal domain. From that day forward, the Tuatha De Danann became the Aos She, the people of the mounds. Over centuries, as memory of them as outright gods faded and Christianity took hold, they transformed in folklore into the powerful, beautiful, and capricious fairies of later Irish tales. They were no longer overtly worshipped, but profoundly respected and intensely feared, immortal beings living just beyond our world's fragile veil. They became the hidden folk, source of countless legends, sudden curses, incredible blessings, haunting unearthly music drifting from hollow hills, and the danger of disturbing their sacred mounds or stealing their treasures. Their final destiny was to become the eternal magic permeating Ireland's very landscape, remaining an ever-present, immortal force, simply hidden from mortal eyes. The Tuatha De Danann story is far more than a creation myth. It's an epic of destiny, civilization, and enduring magical power, the cornerstone of all Celtic mythology. They teach us that nothing of true power is ever truly gone. Defeated by mortals, they didn't vanish into non-existence. They transformed. Their power shifted from overt rule to subtle, hidden, eternal influence, ensuring they'd live on not as forgotten deities, but as an ever-present magical force defining the Irish landscape and spirit. So the next time you walk past an ancient, grass-covered mound in the Irish countryside, a fairy mound, or see, remember this story. You might not just be looking at a hill. You might be standing at a hidden gateway to the otherworld, the immortal kingdom of Ireland's once and future rulers, the eternal, ever-captivating Tuatha De Danann.